Welcome, TIL Nation, to our Pastor's Perspective podcast, where we talk to our pastor and our leader on different current events and subjects that's going on in today's world. And today we will be discussing marriage. If you're interested in getting married, maybe you've been married and you're interested in getting remarried, we're going to touch on all those things today. So, how are you doing today, Pastor?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm good. Thank you for coming to sit with us today and give us your perspective.
I'm glad to be here once again.
Thank you. So, Pastor, I hear you say a lot that marriage is a God thing. Do you think that's why it's under so much attack today?
I really do believe that marriage is a God thing. When you go back from the very beginning, from all the way back from the garden, that's the only thing that God preserved from the garden. So this is the longest institution and known to man. It is marriage. The garden with all of its greenery, all of its lush, all of its beauty, all of that was destroyed. And the only thing that God saved from the garden was Adam and Eve's marital covenant and marital vows. So when you look at that, then you fast forward, New Testamentally speaking, and then you look at the church of the Lord Jesus Christ, that is referred to as the bride of Christ. And then you can go even further than that to say that the relationship that a husband and a wife has with one another. In Ephesians, it talks about how this is symbolic of marriage. And so I believe that marriage is under so much attack, and it is under so much scrutiny from the devil, from the enemy, because he's after anything that brings God glory and brings God honor. So anything, but especially marriage, because it brings God so much glory and so much honor, and it means so much to God, I believe that's why the enemy attacks it the way that he does.
When we think about marriages from past eras or past generations, and then we look at the numbers and the statistics of today's marriages, what do you think has changed? I know in our grandparents and our great grandparents' day, they were married for years. Mm-hmm. I know 50 years, 60 years sometime. And nowadays, it's good to hear a marriage has been 2 years, 3 years. What you think has changed from those times to now?
I definitely think a mindset has changed, a mentality. When our grandparents and great grandparents got married, parents even, marriage was more of for the long haul. It was to death do us part. And I think a lot of times when we look at the good old days and look at how things were, they had their issues, they had their things. I think every family has their little secrets and little things that transpired. Right. This happened there, that happened there, time of separation and all these different things. So it wasn't that it was without its issues, but its mentality towards marriage was to death do us part. Now we're living in this postmodern society where the very institution of marriage, the very definition of what marriage is under scrutiny, is under attack. To where when our grandparents and our great grandparents, when they got married, it was between one male husband and one female wife. And we're living in a society now that's a controversial statement, to where they believe that marriage should be between anybody who you're in love with, things of that nature. And then also to press further down than that, I believe, because we live in a society to where, we feel like we've almost developed a mentality to where if I'm in something or I'm involved in something that I don't want, it's bringing me pain, it's bringing me discomfort, as you just said, I'm out of there. So whether it's a job, whether it's a friendship, especially if it's a marriage or anything, if I'm in a situation I don't want to be there, I'm going to bail out. I'm gonna catch, as old folk would say, I'm gonna catch the first thing smoking to get up out of there, because I feel like I don't need to deal with it. We live in a society where you got millions of songs. I probably have thousands of songs on my device. We all have Netflix and Hulu and YouTube, millions upon millions of movies. We have a lot of options, and I believe that in our postmodern society, because we have so many options, why do we got to cut it on and cut it off when it comes to our relationships? We kind of have that mentality. I don't like this. There's plenty of other fish in the sea. I'm gonna go find me something different and do something better.
Do you think that one of the problems, like you said, with social media and our phones, that we can see the image, right? We can see two people that's married and it looks great. They got all the wedding bells, they got all that, but we just try to get into marriage and jump straight to that, not understanding what it takes to get there, or should we not even look to that? Should we not even fantasize about having this glorious marriage
Right.
with no problems.
I think that if you don't plan, you plan to fail. I believe you ought to have goals, but I believe that getting married is one of the few areas that I will ever say that you ought to lower your expectations. Now, I'm not saying lower your expectation with the person you marry. Now, I'm not saying that, but once you get married, I think you ought to lower your expectations, because a lot of times, especially young ladies, and I don't mean to stereotype, but especially young ladies, they have their Barbie dolls and they have their dream wedding, and I've heard ladies say they've been dreaming of their wedding since they was 8 years old, right. 10 years old. This how their wedding was going to be. This how their marriage is going to be. You know, all of us have our ideas or our pictures of what marriage is, but in a real world, marriage is two imperfect people getting married in an imperfect world with a real devil that hates us and hates marriage. And so I believe this is really one of the few places I tell a person, you need to lower your expectations when it comes to marriage. Don't look at what you see somebody on their snap or their their story. Right, you see their little story and all that. Don't believe that, which that could have some truth. I'm not painting the picture that everybody that posts something is superficial and phony, but that's not what relationship is. That's not what marriage is. It doesn't matter how beautiful our picture is. Doesn't matter how many vacations we take. Marriage is a process. Marriage is challenging. Marriage is difficult, and it's not going to be picture perfect. I don't care if God told you to marry this person. I don't care if y'all just are so compatible that y'all finish each other's sentences all the time, but it still is going to be growing together, learning one another. And you have to lower your expectations, because if I go into marriage thinking that my wife, this is what a wife should be, this is what a wife should do, this is what my husband should do, this is what my husband should be, 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna get a real eye opener, and I can be in love all day. I've said so many times that love is blind, but marriage is an eye opener. Nothing can talk about wake you up, Folgers in your cup, something like that. Nothing like slapping the taste out your mouth than marriage. Marriage just slap the taste out your mouth when you really understand that this thing is for real. This is real life.
Do you think that's also one of the hiccups with marriage, that we think that love is what's going to hold this whole thing together? As long as I love this person and they love me, this marriage is going to work? I
think so. I think our poor definition of what love is, I think a lot of times we identify love with goosebumps. We identify love with googly eyes, and I identify love with this feeling or this emotion that I get when I gaze into her eyes or look into his eyes and all that stuff. And we identify that with love. So, and I think in our society, we equate the fact that I don't feel this way towards this person anymore, and so that must tell me that I don't love this individual. But in the true biblical sense, love has nothing to do with my emotions. Love has nothing to do with how I feel when I gaze into your eyes, and the fact that you do this and do that for me internally. Love has everything to do with my commitment to you. 1 Corinthians 13 tells us that again and again and again, that love is this and love is that, and all of them are verbs, all of them are action words, and tell us what love is. So it has nothing to do with whether people say all the time, I fall out of love, or I don't love this person anymore. And that, I believe that that's just a misunderstanding of what the definition of love really is. Because what you're really saying is, I don't want to be committed to this person anymore. I don't want to put any equity in this relationship anymore, because love has nothing to do with the feeling. It has nothing to do with, googly eyes. It has everything to do with the fact that I am committed and I'm dedicated to this person, and I'm going to honor my vows.
Is it that feeling? Do you think that that's also one of the problems, that a lot of time people are trying to chase that feeling again after so long in the marriage? When in the majority of cases, when you first meet somebody, you have that feeling, you have those butterflies when y'all see each other and y'all finish each other's sentences. And then as time go on, after you've gotten married, do you think that's what people are trying to chase when you say they're confusing it with love? Because they throw in the towel, because I don't get that feeling when I walk in the room and see you no more. I don't get those butterflies when I see your number on my caller ID.
I think that a lot of people don't do the hard work that it takes to get back to that feeling. Because if the feeling was there, the feeling was real. I mean, and of course, all of us go through that puppy dog stage in our relationships, where we just all dog, blue, 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 you know, but all of us go through that. But that doesn't mean, who says that has to stop? Who says that that can't be something that's perpetual? Who says that can't be something that we can often revisit? So I think a lot of times when there's resentment, when there's bitterness, when there's anger, when there's disagreements, when there's arguments, and I've said some things that really hurt you, you said some things to me that really hurt me, when there's been adultery, where there's been financial woes, where there've been all these different things that have created a wedge or created a wall between us, and now it's almost impossible for us to get back to that feeling. So I think that a lot of persons, sure, it creates a lot of issues because we're chasing that feeling, but I think a lot of times persons don't want to do the hard work that it takes in order to get back to that feeling, because you have to do some soul searching, you have to be real, you have to say, hey, this bothered me, this offended me, hey, I'm upset with you about this. You got to forgive, you can't forget some things. I'm real loose in saying that. You got to forgive and forgive and forgive, and you got to keep on, you got to be willing to want to pursue that utopia, so to speak. But nobody's gonna stay on cloud nine their entire marriage. But who says we got to be miserable? Who said we got to be angry with one another? I believe that that you ought to grow, you ought to develop in your love. Now, of course, that, as I said again, that little puppy dog thing, has its place, but I believe that I love my wife more today than I did before because I know her more. We got some skin in the game. We've been through some things together, and so now, before, when it was just a feeling more so, or emotion more so, or what she did for me when we conversated and we was around. Now, after children, now after so many, after firing and after deaths and after ministry and so many different things we've been through together, my love for her is stronger now today than it was February the 19th. Was it 19th? No, I'm joking. It's February 19th, 2005. My love is stronger today. So I believe that we can chase that feeling, but I think so many people don't want to go through the hard work that it takes to get to that feeling or stay in that place.
How necessary is counseling before marriage, or is it necessary? Do you think that two people can quote unquote counsel themselves in a way, or do you think that it is necessary that two people go and find somebody who is, not biased,
right,
and give somebody who's an official person to give them a perspective? Or do you think that you can do it on your own? You guys can try to go into this thing without that? I
really think that marriage counseling is underrated. Mm-hmm. It's underrated. I think it's very essential that where you get that person that is trained and that knows to ask the right questions, and the real benefit, the end of it all when it comes to counseling, is that a third party, it takes that third person to ask particular questions that normally my potential spouse and I would not ask, and to drill down in these particular areas and to talk about these different circumstances and scenarios that have happened with the individuals and that potentially will happen with the individuals, so that counseling sessions or sessions they are very, very important, because we need to drill down, and there's some things that we just got to talk about. We have to talk about children. We have to talk about, do you like kids? Do you want kids? And let's not even talk about if you're bringing some kids to the table and I'm bringing some kids. We got to talk about those things. We got to talk about child support. We got to talk about employment. We got to talk about spirituality. We got to talk about outlaws, in-laws. We got to talk about all of that. And most of the time, what persons do, like you talked about self-counseling, what persons do, well, I'm in love, well, we'll be all right. And then so we just think we're naive, and we think whenever we get to that barrier, we get to that hurdle, we get to that bridge, we'll be able to cover it. And some do. Some are able to cover it and cross it and keep on going, but the vast majority of persons don't. They get stuck, and it becomes a much bigger issue. So I think the counseling is absolute mandatory. You have to get some counseling. And in my perspective, what name of the show is again?
Pastor's Perspective.
All right, Pastor's Perspective. So in my perspective, I think it needs to be a spiritual person. And I tell people all the time when I sit down, come on, you hire the caterer, their specialty is the food. You hire the DJ, their specialty is the music. You hire the wedding coordinator, their specialty is to see what flowers look good and what the brides bridesmaids need to do and what the ring bearer need to do. And come on, you come and you talk to a spiritual person or the pastor, the man of God, the woman of God, and I'm supposed to give a spiritual perspective about the relationship and about the marriage. So I think it's just absolutely essential that you sit down and you talk to someone to where you guys begin to unearth and talk about these different things that potentially can happen or things that have already happened with the individuals.
So now we know counseling is for the couples. What is some things that people should do as individuals before they even pursue getting married?
Right. Yeah. I think a person should do a lot of soul searching. I think a person should be very, very purposeful about being holistic, not holy. We don't mind you being holy. We want you to be holy too. But holistic speaks to every part of you, mentally being whole, physically being whole, emotionally being whole, financially being whole. So I think as an individual, I think a lot of times persons look at marriage or look at relationships as if this person is going to fulfill me or complete me. Camilla Jean Nesbitt, as much as I love her, she ain't Jesus. She doesn't fulfill me, but I get something from her. I get a level of relationship. I get a level of connectivity from her that I can't get from no one else, but she doesn't complete me. No, my relationship with God completes me. I'm a complete person now. I wasn't when we got married, but I'm a complete person now. And so my point is a lot of people kind of enter into relationships thinking that this person going to complete them and fulfill them, when if I'm a half a person and you're a half a person, we just got into a whole mess, because two halves is one whole mess. Right. So to answer your question, before I start wanting to get married or entertain to get married, I need to really be doing a deep dive into my mental well-being, trying to make sure I deal with all of my issues, all of my things that have happened to me. All of us have trauma. All of us have pain. All of us come from a context. And I like to say it this way, that very few of us make it out of our home of origin where we're unscathed, where we know for the vast majority, unless you come from Family Matters or you come from Leave It to Beaver, and even Eddie had some pain on Family Matters because he was so upset about what the cops did to him that time. I don't think he ever recovered. And the way they threw Urkel out the house, that just wasn't cool either. So even in Family Matters, even Winslow had some problems. So the vast majority of us, when we emerge out of our home into our adult life, we have some issues, we have some problems, we have some pain, we have some things we need to deal with, whether it's mama problems, daddy problems, sibling rivalries, financial things. It doesn't matter what it is. So I need to do my due diligence in trying to make sure that I'm healed and whole from all of those issues before I bring all of that to a marriage and to a relationship, because if I'm not, I'm just bringing all of that baggage, all that pain right into that marriage.
How much should we look into, like we go from puppy dog eyes, we go from butterfly feelings, we get to counseling and we find out, whoa, you don't like this, I don't like that, you don't like this. How much should we look into that? Because all your life, you think that the perfect person is somebody I got a lot of stuff in common with, but you also hear in life that opposites attract. Right. So how much should you look into that when you get to counseling and you find out, wait a minute, this person ain't into this and I'm into that? How deep should we go with that? Do you say, okay, this thing ain't gonna work because I want 5 kids and you want 3? How much weight do I put on that counseling? That's
a very good question. I think that there ought to be some deal breakers. There ought to be some deal breakers, some things that happen that if I'm just dead set against, and I don't want to give any examples. Maybe I'll come back to it as I think of a couple. But I think that there ought to be some commonality. There ought to be some things that I absolutely have in common with you. It's really hard for me to be a brain surgeon, and the only thing you like talking about is Pokemon cards. That's after a while, let's go. Opposites do attract, but opposites at the same time do agitate. And so I'm so madly in love with this, and we can talk about a mental golf. We can talk about things that I love or things that I'm fond of. Just say for instance, I'm heavy in the kingdom. I love God. I'm heavily involved in my local church. And so now you're marrying a person, or you're sitting in that counseling session with somebody. The last time they've been to church when somebody died, they never went to church. And so they answer me and the man upstairs. We got something together. We good. I'm cool with God and all that kind of stuff. We got our own thing going. I got my own relationship relationship with God. And so I think that there are some things that we ought to have in common, because those things are not going to go away. If I'm passionate about something before I get married, 9 times out of 10, I'm still going to be passionate about it after I get married. Maybe I'm a season ticket holder for the Jaguars and you hate football and you can't stand football. You're not even going to try to sit on the couch for me and watch a game. You don't understand. You think it's dumb. You think it's stupid. And now you got to antagonize me every time we talking about football. Maybe you're heavy in the ballet. Maybe you like orchestra. Maybe you like the travel. And I'm a homebody. There are so many things that we have to at least have a commonality, because it's going to get real old real quick whenever it is that I'm either grinning and bearing, whether I'm just going along with the flow and I really don't like this, it really aggravates me, it's going to get real old real quick. So I think, to answer your question, I think that those things should be an indication. Should be something I ought to look at. It should be something that, man, we don't agree on this. We don't have this in common, but at least we have these big things in common. At least we have these things in common, and we can work on from here. We can build on from here. But I believe that as long as I just kind of turn a deaf ear to some things or overlook some things, I'm probably going to end up with some pain or with some agitation, at least in the near future.
When you're at that altar and you're marrying and you're taking this oath, you're marrying that person in that space that they're in at that time, physical, mentally. That's what you're marrying. Should you expect that your spouse is going to change and not be the person that you married on February 19th 5 years later? Should you expect that, and should you have to deal with that, even though when I took that covenant, it was with who you were at that time?
Sure. Yes, you should expect that, and yes, you should deal with that, because that individual is going to change. Life brings about a change. Life brings about a person evolving. I think the thing that we have to be mindful of, and we have to hold our spouses accountable to, is negative change. How it is now, you can encourage your spouse, and say, hey, come on, let's do this, and come on, let's do that. But I think that we have to, yes, expect change, and I think, yes, we ought to deal with it, but we have to hold that spouse accountable, or at least attempt to hold that spouse accountable when they're changing negatively, because we don't want to start becoming resentful. We don't want to start harboring something in our heart because this is not the person that I married. This is not the person that I fell in love with. That's what a lot of people say. This is not the same person I fell in love with. This is not the same person that I met. And there's some truth to that. Okay. But yet at the same time, I say all the time, I pray I've matured from the time you met me. Right. I pray I'm not the same mentally that I was when you met. So prayerfully, and here's the other side of the coin, to where when your spouse is changing for the good or changing for the better, I think that the responsibility also is on the spouses to continue to grow with one another. Because not just negative change. We can go to a physical change. We can go to where you hit ruts and you hit bad spots in your life, where all of us hit bad spots and ruts in our life, but also in a positive way, where this spouse is going back to school, this spouse they're pursuing these degrees, this spouse is starting this company, this spouse is doing all these different things, and you just stuck home watching TV, and you don't want anything better. You're not trying to do anything, and that breeds a type of frustration as well. So to come all the way back around for the third time to answer your question, yes, I think you ought to expect change, because people change. Life brings about a change, and yes, you ought to deal with the change. But I think that it ought to be a balancing act, to where we're holding one another accountable, to where we're not changing too badly in a negative way. But at the same time, if I see my spouse is growing and developing, I need to grow with my spouse, because I don't want to get left behind. That's not a good phrase to use when we talk about marriage, left behind. But people's interests change, people's desires change, and so if I'm in love with this person, I'm committed with this person, I need to learn. This is what marriage is, Angelo, and I'm gonna tee it back up to you. I'm gonna give it back to you. This is what marriage is. Marriage is learning to love what your spouse loves. Marriage is learning to love and to like the things that they love and they like. So as my spouse is changing, and because I love them, I'm gonna change with them. I'm gonna roll with them, and I'm gonna try to have that balancing act. I'm holding them accountable for the negative things, but at the same time, I'm gonna grow with them.
In today's culture, outside of the church, talking about the world, my peers, my generation, and this is not me down talking them, because I came from that.
Sure.
As of recent, when we were in relationships, we don't really see, I don't know if we don't see the significance of marriage, but we wonder, why do I need to get married? If I've been with someone for so many years, why should I get married? Why do we have to make this official? What happens when you get married? And I'm talking about a couple that's been together for some time,
sure,
but they are not married yet. What changes? What do you tell that couple changes when they make it official?
When you make it official, whether you're children of God or not, because you said outside the church, we'll deal with it both ways, because marriage is a God thing. Godly principles work whether or not a person is in the kingdom or not. Okay. So marriage is a God thing, and that's my conviction. Marriage is a God thing. So whether or not a person claims to be a Christian or not, when you get married, because you're doing something that God instituted, God honors that. God honors that. So let's look at it that way. So immediately when you enter into a marriage agreement, a marriage covenant, to a certain degree, you invite God's presence in your relationship. And so what changes with individuals is that, now that you have done something God's way, now you have God's favor and God's blessings to a degree on your relationship that you didn't have before. Because the Bible tells me that he that finds a wife findeth a good thing and obtain favor with the Lord. And when I'm just with an individual, I'm not saying that things can't happen and you can't have favor on your life, but you don't have that kind of favor that God, the potentiality of favor on your life that you should have whenever it is that you enter into a marriage agreement. So when a person gets married and this is your wife, now you have invoked God's favor on your life. What is favor? That just sounds like some old churchy term. Favor is just simply says that God will allow you to walk through doors that you have no business walking in. God will allow you to live in homes that you have no business living in, driving cars you have no business driving, sitting at tables you have no business sitting at. God will open up doors for you that you could not open for yourself. We don't want to make that materialistic, because it's not just materialistic, it's naturally and it's spiritually. God will give you favor, and favor is what you want, my friend. And then at the same time, Angelo, a lot of people say that things began to jump off when they got married. We were good when we were shacking. Right. We were good when we was good. We was together 10 years, we got 12 years, and things was good. But now you change teams. I'll use the illustration. If we're on a 4-lane street, 2 going one way and 2 going another way, as long as we're going the same direction, as long as we're side by side one another, the chances of us 2 having a head-on collision is slim to none, because we're going in the same direction. But the moment that I invite God's presence in my life, the moment that I get married, the moment I become a child of God, now all of a sudden I'm on the other way. I'm going the opposite direction. Now I'm on a 2-lane highway, and now because I switched teams, now because I'm going another direction, now Satan can attack me. He will attack me, because as we said, we entered into this conversation saying the marriage is a God thing, and anything that God gets glory out of, anything that's near and dear to God's heart, that's where Satan attacks. And so he's going to attack your marriage now, whereas your relationship before, when y'all was shacking, they didn't bother y'all were cool. Sure, y'all had y'all problems, y'all had y'all arguments and all that stuff, but it's gonna increase the burners. The bloodhounds of hell are going to be turned up on your marriage, your relationship, because Satan wants nothing more than for you all to get a divorce. And then he's going to shake his fist at it and say, see there, you should have stayed shacking. See there, listen how the devil sounds. See, you should have stayed in sin and you'd have been all right. Isn't that how the devil does? The Bible talks about in Hebrews 11:25 how Moses chose rather to suffer with the people of God, rather to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. In other words, the devil's way is enjoyable. The devil's way is pleasurable. The devil's way, man, you can, all right, I'm feeling this. I like this. But the moment that you and I start doing things God's way, then we can start looking for an assault. We can start looking for an attack from the enemy. But I shouldn't be nervous about that, because if I'm a child of God, I know the question started saying the person that was in the church and out of the church, if I'm a child of God, I'm gonna be all right. As one character said off Martin. I don't know. I can't never remember the guy name. I'm gonna be all right. And so you don't know either. He's just looking great. Otis, I guess. Yeah, Otis. The security guard, Otis. Yeah.
Otis.
I'm gonna be all right. I thought it was a guy with the curl that was trying to get with Gina. What was his name?
Jerome.
Jerome in the house. Pam. He was trying to get with Pam.
Probably trying to get with both of them.
Trying to get both of them. Okay, I got you. All right. What was the guy named that was a karate guy?
Oh, Superfly.
Superfly. All right. So we got Superfly, Otis, and
Superfly, Otis, and Jerome.
All right. So anyway, I'm gonna be all right. So the point is, you're gonna be all right. You're a child of God. The devil attacks you. The devil antagonizes you. He tries to do whatever he does. That's what he does. But Romans 8:31 says, if God be for us, who can be against us? So doing things God's way is always the better way. So that's what a person can look for whenever it is they decide to get married. They've been with an individual for a long time and now they want to get married. You can look for favor. You can look for the hand of God to be in your relationship, on your relationship, not just physically, but also holistically. And you can also look for an attack between the individuals. And I think this helps me in the attack if I know the attack is going to come, because I know that it's not my spouse I'm fighting. This is not my spouse that is trying to cause a wedge or cause us to be in divorce court. This is Satan. This is a spirit that's trying to attack us.
Something I've learned coming into the word and being under the word a lot, the word commitment. Do you think, or do you see that a lot, that we really don't know what that means, or maybe we know what it means and we're just scared to do it, or we don't want to do it? Because I've just from my personal experiences and looking at other marriages, especially ones that end quick, it's when an issue come, if like you said, if I don't want to deal with something, I get out, whether it's a job, but especially in a marriage, is that one of the reasons that you think that people don't make that full commitment so that when they're ready to go, they can just get out? Or do you think it's other
right? I think that has something to do with it, because what I'm signing up for. I think that we approach marriage. Some people approach marriage in a way haphazardly, not fully understanding, not fully knowing. It doesn't matter how many books you read, no matter how many counseling sessions you go to, no matter how many seminars you go to, you're still not going to be fully prepared for marriage, because life is not a textbook. Life is real life, and it's got to be some OJT, got to be some on the job training. So I think that a lot of times persons kind of enter into marriage maybe thinking that they can change this individual. There's some things about them that they don't like. Maybe they can change with them. Maybe they can deal with it. And we kind of set ourselves up not knowing or not thinking about the long haul. Right. Because if I go into it with my hand on the eject button, right, or if I go into it and I still got my sideline, right, I still got my February 13th old lady, you know, the one I got. My main I spend time with on Valentine's Day, but on the 13th I go swing through there on the 3rd. As long as I still got my 13th and my 15th on deck, right, then I'm not going to be committed, because I got all these other options. Right. And so when you go into it to where this is something that my wife and I talked about from the very beginning, divorce is not an option. Right. We're not talking about divorce. Right. It's not going to happen. We're not going to talk about divorce. And so a lot of times we don't enter into marriage with that type of determination, that type of come sink or swim, come hell or high water, we still gonna be together. And so long as divorce is on the table, long as plan B is on the table, long as plan C is on the table, you're gonna take the path of least resistance. It's easier for me just to bail. Right. It's easier for me just to get up out of Dodge than to deal with what I need to deal with. So I think commitment has a lot to do with it. And I think taking on the weight of marriage, I think we just kind of go into it, just thinking it, okay, it's just like a girlfriend, boyfriend, okay, whatever. Well, but not, yeah, exactly. No, it doesn't work that way. It's for the long haul. It's long term. It's different ups and downs and seasons and just so much that goes on in a marriage. I have to be mentally prepared to say, man, I'm here for the long haul. And even when you mentally prepared to say I'm here for the long haul, it's still gonna be seasons the way you're gonna want to tap out. Still gonna be one of the seasons the way you're not gonna want to come home. Still gonna be seasons where you just want to drive around and just drive and don't ever come home or whatever. You still gonna have those seasons. But then when you're saying that you're marrying someone, you're saying that it's to have and to hold. It's through sickness and in health. It's to the good and the bad, the ugly. It's richer or poor. It's all of that. And so when I understand that, and when those vows are tested, and lo, they will be tested, then I got to make up in my mind I'm gonna still stick in there, and I'm still gonna do what I need to do.
You spoke to earlier about how as children, in particular young women, but just as children, we grow up and we want this perfect marriage. How important is it for parents to be transparent with their children when they're married? Because as parents, it's a automatic switch to not expose our kids to certain things. At least it should be. Let's argue in the room.
Sure.
Let's not disagree in front of them.
Sure.
But should there be some level of transparency with our kids so they can have some kind of idea of knowing that marriage isn't perfect, or how would parents go about it? Married parents go about
Personally, I believe that parents ought to model marriage. I am to model marriage in such a way to where my kids want to get married. Okay. I am the model. Whose perspective? This pastor's perspective. All right, so I am the model marriage in a way to where my sons and my daughters say, man, I can't wait till I get married. I can't wait till I can grow up and I can be married, because they see their parents modeling marriage. And so in modeling marriage, that doesn't mean that it's perfect. That doesn't mean that we're not going to have trouble and trials and all of that. So I would be careful when you say transparent, because as you spoke to, I'm not going to be there's certain conversations I'm not going to have in front of my wife. There's certain in front of my children, and some certain conversations my wife and I are not going to have in front of our children. There are certain things that we're not going to talk about or discuss in front of our children, because they're not the parents, they're children. They're not grown-ups, we are. So we ain't finna be talking about, my personal belief, we ain't finna be at the table, oh, we got to pay these bills, oh, the mortgage due, what we gonna do now? Now I'm taking this pressure that's supposed to be squarely on our shoulders, and we're pushing it on them. They're children. They don't need to be worried about bills and worried about gas and worried about school clothes and all that kind of stuff. And so I shouldn't project that on them. But I do believe that every now and then, I think that we ought to pick and choose when we allow our children to see us respectfully disagree. Just let them know we're not going to agree on everything. We're not finna sit here and they're like, oh yes dear, yes darling, yes. That's not how it goes. So we pick, my wife and I, we pick and choose. Okay, let's disagree here. Let them see, because it's not like, we're not at each other's throat. We're not demeaning one another, not calling each other names. So I think we ought to live our lives, not hypocritical, not superficial, just live our lives. But so that's why the responsibility is such on the parents, not so much of training and teaching our children verbally, but training and teaching our children through experience and through what we model and the way we live. And so, I'm going to sit down and talk to my children about marriage and talk to them about what you don't take this from this person. You don't do this. I'm to train them. But the same way, man, when I see it modeled right in front of me through my mother, through my father, and I see that they genuinely love each other, and I see that they genuinely care for one another, and I model that in a way, that's going to be magnetic. And so that's why Jesus said, and Paul said in Ephesians, that marriage is a picture of what God does to us through the church. And so he says, Ephesians 5, he says, husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church and gave himself for the church. And so that's the that is the ultimate sacrificial love and what should model. So what my marriage is, it is to the world, is a model, it's a example, it's a life picture of how God loves you and I. And so if I am my point in saying all that is, Angelo, if I am to model that for the world through my marriage, I sure enough need to model that through my children through my marriage.
So you don't believe there's ever grounds for divorce?
I do believe, and that's a very controversial topic, but you asked me my perspective. So I do believe personally that there are some grounds for divorce. I believe that divorce should not be the knee-jerk reaction. I believe that we ought to take divorce off of the table. But I do believe that a person can get to a point to where divorce is the conversation that needs to be had. Those things, abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, however it is that you want to categorize the abuse. There's many different types of abuse. And if you are, or a person is experiencing abuse and you're with someone that doesn't want to change, if you're with someone that is not seeking professional help, if you're with someone that continues and constantly is abusing you, now I believe that divorce is something that we need to start talking about, because it's obvious that this person doesn't want to change and they want to continue to abuse me. They continue to hurt me, and they're not getting any real help. And I think, let me say this, because I think a lot of times a person can be remorseful, but a person is not repentive. So a person can feel bad about what they've done, but they ain't repentant. Repentance is turning. Repentance is changing. And so just because a person is remorseful or feel bad about the abuse, that doesn't mean that it's okay. They need to get themselves some help, some professional help, some counseling, some mental help to be able to help them so we won't keep going down that road. So abuse, also adultery. Adultery is grounds for divorce. If you're with an individual and they step outside the marriage, they commit adultery, it's a conversation for divorce. And now, to be fair, can I say to be fair when we're talking about adultery? But the other side of the coin is this, that just because a person commits adultery, that doesn't mean that that person is still not the person that God has for you, because the Bible teaches us that a person can be overtaken in a fault. A person can be in the wrong place at the wrong time, seeing the wrong thing, talking to the wrong person, and then they can be overtaken in a fault. But there's a difference between a person that is been overtaken in a fault and a person who like being in a fault. Right. and so that's where, when it comes to adultery, that's where you need that counseling. You need to be able to sit down and need to talk about that thing, because there's something that needs to be talked about. Because on the adulterer needs to find out and say, if I do, am I going to be faithful to my spouse, or is this something that I'm going continually to do? Because I wish the poet Ludacris was here, because he says, when you're a habitual offender, you can't turn one of them into a
housewife.
Yeah, they don't act right. So what I'm saying, so there's some people that can be a habitual offender, and so that's a person that's not remorseful. But then on the other side, the offended party has to say, if I'm going to stay here with this person, am I up for the task at hand, the journey at hand, to forgive this person? Because if I'm going to stay here in this relationship after this adultery, I need to be working towards forgiving them. Now, what I mean by working towards forgiving them, I'm not saying that the conversation is never going to come up. I'm not going to say that they're going to always be so giddy about being sexual with you, because different things come up. They think about this person. They think about this. They think about how you did this, how you did this, and then I'm not going to say they're not going to have flashbacks to when the last time you told me you was working late, you was really over here doing this and you was doing that. So I'm not, they'll have flashbacks. They'll have seasons of where they're still battling with that, but I can't stay there. So if I'm going to stay in the marriage, I'm going to fight for my marriage, I have to be working towards forgiveness. And working towards forgiveness is, I got to mature eventually to where I'm not bringing this thing up every day and every time it comes up. So adultery is one of those things you're going to need to get you some counseling. First and foremost, do you want to stop? The adulterer, do you want to stop? Or are you just going to be a playboy, playgirl? That's a whole nother conversation. And if I'm going to stay in this relationship, am I willing to work towards forgiveness? Because you have some people that'll say, I can never be with you anymore. I can never trust you again. I can never get over the pain. I can never get over the hurt. And that's where a person is. So that's grounds for divorce. And then thirdly, and I'm gonna give it back to you. I know this is a long answer, but you asked me a controversial question, so I got to give you my perspective. And then the third one would be abandonment, because a person just decides they don't want to be married anymore. A person just gone. They just pack their stuff and they dip, or they abandon you in house, because you don't have to move out to abandon somebody. You can be gone emotionally. You can be gone financially, where you're not helping with nothing no more. You can be detached from the children. You can be detached, and so you've abandoned this person. So I do think that there are grounds for divorce: abuse, adultery, and abandonment. But at the same time, I still believe that you ought to fight for your marriage and fight for your relationship. But you ought to do it with wisdom. You ought to do it with prayer, and you ought to do it with counseling. Having individuals to kind of help you be able to navigate through that, along with the Holy Spirit.
I'm glad you brought up abandonment, because I want to, excluding abandonment, do we have to understand that just because someone, whether it's the man or the woman, commits adultery, it does not mean that I don't love my spouse?
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. A person can make a mistake. A person can make, that doesn't mean that they don't love their spouse. It could have been I don't want to sit here and try to paint a bunch of scenarios about how adultery can happen. I mean, I'm sure all of us can understand how adultery can take place and can happen. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because a person commits adultery, that does not mean that they're not the person for you. They just got to make a decision. Now, if you're going to be with me, be with me. But you're not going to be with me and be with all these other people. So to answer your question, I mean, you can love your spouse and make a mistake, and you can love your spouse and mess up and all these other kind of have a fit of carnality. You can love your spouse and kind of lose your mind for a season, but at the same time, it got to come to a point where somebody got to make a decision. Right. I may have made a mistake, but at the same time, I got to make a decision that the mistake that I made, I can't sit here and make excuses for it. I can't sit here and say and condone what it is that has happened or excuse away what has happened. I got to make a decision and say, okay, that was wrong, and I can't do that anymore because I love my spouse and I desire to be with my spouse, so I'm going to make a change.
To the ludicrous statement, right? About
the poet Ludacris, right? Yeah, poet. Yeah, turn a habitual offender,
woman,
yeah,
right, and so a housewife.
Yeah.
Now, I want to go to the Bible.
I don't care what Chris Brown say, right? But go ahead.
Going to the Bible, and what was, you said marriage is a God thing. Do you think God was, or what was the message God was trying to send us in the book of Hosea when we see him tell Hosea to go and get his wife after she had done those very things that you just talked about, and he said no, you go get her, you pay off her debts, and you receive her again? What was he trying to tell us with that?
Wow, that's powerful. The gospel. That's what he was trying to picture to us, trying to illustrate to us, and that's the gospel, because you and I, everyone who's a child of God, is Gomer. All of us are that adulterous woman, because to God, as relates to God, and because God is our creator. God is the one that we ought to be in covenant with. God is the one that we ought to be in relationship with. And the Bible, Ezekiel talks about it, as well as the prophet Hosea talks about it, that where we can go out whoring around with other gods. So anytime I sin against God, anytime I know better but don't do better, anytime I do something that's not God's will, God's word, God's way, I am literally committing spiritual adultery on God. And this is what Moses, the very first commandment, say, thou shalt not have any other gods before me. He said, because I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. He's a jealous God. So anytime I do those things, anytime I commit those sins or break the dime, not top of the line, keep facing always with the big, the dime means the 10 commandments. So anytime I break any of the commandments, not just the 10, but anytime I just want to say dime, I'm sorry. So anytime I commit something or I sin against God, I'm committing spiritual adultery. So what God was showing us, that's such a powerful question. What God was showing us through Hosea and Gomer was that's the gospel story, because that's all of us. And what God is saying to us, no matter how much you mess up, no matter how much you go whoring around with other gods, I don't care how much you smoke, I don't care how much you drink, I don't care how much you shoot up, I don't care how much you club, I don't care how much you party, I don't care how much you sex, I don't care how much you do all those things that are over and against my will and my word and my way, I still love you and I'll still come for you. I'm going to come for you and I'm going to find you, and I'm going to do like the prophet did for his wife. I'm going to buy you back. We're all God's property. Come on, we're not all God's children. If you're not a child of God, if you have not accepted the Lord Jesus Christ as your Lord and your personal Savior, you're not his child. No, you've been created by him, but yet and still God comes and he buys us back through the shed blood of the Lord Jesus Christ. He buys back his own property and he brings us into relationship with him. And so it's a powerful illustration. It's a powerful story. That is the gospel message. But also, if God treats us this way, Angelo, let's bring it down and make application to us. If this is how God feels about me, when me personally, I grew up in church. Me personally, I was in the youth choir. Me personally, I was, from the time I can never remember a time in my life that I wasn't in church. I grew up in church, but even though I grew up in church, church was not in me. And so I still went out. I still went astray. And so if what God is showing me
even
personally,
though you knew better.
even though I knew better, even though I went astray, he still came and got me and brought me back in the relationship with him, still put his favor on my life. And so the point is for me, for application, how arrogant is it for me not to forgive other people who have sinned against me? When I've sinned against, I haven't given them air, haven't given them breath, I haven't done that. Nowhere near what God has done for me. Right. So how can I hold that against them? And then let's go even further and come closer to home. I heard. Come on, I heard. Let's bring it closer to home. I heard. How can I say that when it comes to a person in the street or a friend or a neighbor or a cousin or a sister and a brother? Now let's bring that into my marriage. Right. So the picture that God was showing me and showing all of us when it comes to that prophet going to bring back this woman from doing all those things that she did was that's the way we ought to cover our spouses. That's the way we ought to cover our wives. That's the way we ought to cover our husbands because that's what marriage is. Marriage is, if it's nothing else, marriage is about forgiveness. Marriage is the way I got to not draw the line. And when we talked about those other things, if they doing this and they doing that now, come on. We ain't just telling you to be no gullible person, just keep doing and doing and doing and doing. The other person got to make a decision, but I believe you get the general point that I'm trying to make.
You said a key word, and that's what I was going to ask. Does God look at that as some sense of arrogance? As far as, Hosea being an example, but is he saying you're arrogant to say that you're not going to forgive her for all these things when you've done all these things to me, but I forgive you?
Yes, sir. The Bible tells us, I shouldn't quote it because I don't remember for sure. I believe it's Romans chapter 2, verse 1. It says, King James, thou art inexcusable, O man, thou that judgest. In other words, I went straight King James on you.
Thou. You know, a bunch of thou.
In other words, you see his eyes. You're like,
I got you.
what Paul is saying? Paul is saying there's no excuse for me because now I'm judging other people when I myself should have been judged. Right. Come on, Jesus talks about how can you have a telegram pole in your eye and I'm talking about a toothpick in your eye. He said, get that toothpick out. I'm bothering you about your toothpick, but I got a telephone pole sticking out of my eye. And so, I do believe that God is not pleased with that whenever it is that I draw the line, as we had another perspective. Go back and check episode, I don't know what episode number it is. We talked about forgiveness, where Peter said, Jesus, how many times should I forgive my brother? Till seven times seven. And Jesus said, no, till 7 times 7. And 490 times a day. And so it's not so much of me saying, all right, 485, 489.
Yeah, one more time.
One more time. No, that's not what God is saying. God is saying that I am to love individuals just like he's loved me, just like he's forgiven me, just like he's given me another chance, not a second chance, but he's giving me another chance. I am to do the same thing when it comes to someone else. And when I don't carry myself that way, when I don't live that way, God says that, if you don't forgive them, I won't forgive you. That's how heavy that is. That's how God looks at that. If I hold something against you, God said, I'm going to hold that against you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Pastor, for that perspective on
yes,
marriage.
Sir.
TIL Nation, we are not done with our marriage series. We will be back next week. Please tune in again for our pastor's perspective on marriage. All right. See you later. Here comes the church.
Peace out. Here comes the church. Love y'all. Bye-bye.